Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and I'm happy to introduce today's guest, Steve Lewis. Steve has been a high school educator and coach for 30 years. He writes for Havok Journal and is an incredible advocate for veterans. Steve is also involved with advocacy for our Afghan allies, which I know we're going to be diving into as this episode progresses. But Steve and I have a lot in common, and I feel like this is going to be a really interesting and unique episode. I don't think I've had another guest like you, Steve, so this will be really fun to do together, and thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, so the first thing that you and I have in common that I want you to tell me about is we both come from military families. My dad is a 1978 U.S. Naval Academy graduate. You have a long line of forebears who went to the
institution. West Point has had a tremendous influence on my life. My dad was in the class of 1952, and then my grandfather, I have a picture of him behind me. He was in the class of November 1918. They did 2 classes accelerated to produce officers for the First World War. So my grandfather ended up serving for 30 years until 1948. So he was technically a veteran of World War I and World War II. Went all over the world, saw all kinds of things. In addition to that, my great uncle was in the class of 1917, and he, as I mentioned before, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in New Guinea in 1942, and he's buried at West Point in the cemetery there. And then his father, my great uncle's father, was in the class of 1882 and had previously graduated from the University of Alabama with a degree in engineering, and he was one of the engineers that constructed the Gatun locks on the Panama Canal. And then he ended up being the military governor of the Panama Canal Zone until he retired from the Army in 1936. So that's the legacy in my family. So my dad graduated in 1952 from United States Military Academy, and then he served in Korea in 1953, and he was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for his service by General DeWitt Clinton Ginder. Who's also buried at West Point. And then my dad realized, because his own upbringing, he moved to so many places that he didn't want to see that for his own kids. So, and he also wanted to be an engineer. So he got out of the Army and got a job with Pratt & Whitney Aircraft as an aerospace engineer, and worked at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft for 40 years. But because of his own military upbringing and his service, that affected the way that I was raised as a child and as a teenager. And then the other part of it was that my dad had an incredible work ethic, and that was passed down not only to myself but then to my 2 sisters as well. So the 2 influences were, the discipline and then the work ethic, and then from my grandfather. My grandfather was, when I was a teenager, he was about 70 years old. Looking back on his life, and he told me all these stories about the places that he'd been and the things that he'd done, and those stories gave me a love for history, and so that's kind of influenced where I am now. I love to hear the stories of other people, and then be able to relate those stories, because I think it helps to give us a great connection when we can be good storytellers.
Absolutely. That's why I do what I do, I think, too. I grew up with a fighter pilot father, right, who I had so many uncles who were not related to me in any way, shape, or form, but they were all fighter pilots that my dad flew with. And if you were really lucky, at the end of the night, they would start telling flying stories. And there was nothing that in fact, my first ever story that I ever wrote was it was one of the first. It was about my dad. It was the third, I think, actually. But it's about my dad and all his fighter pilot buddies and their storytelling tradition. And I have always said, like, when you're there, you feel like you're in the plane. You feel everything about what they're, because it's so visceral to them, and talking about it is almost as good as being there. If they can't be there, they're going to be talking about it. And I love those stories too. And I've learned that it's not just fighter pilots who have great stories, it's all veterans. And
Yes.
whether that's a story of conflict or if it's a story of a training, incident that happened, it's something. And it's just, I think that life in those moments, it just has such high, drama isn't the right word, but there's like catharsis in all of those experiences, and they just convey it so well, and you just want to hear it. So I that's why I do what I do, I think, as well, is because I want to tell stories like that for the rest of my life. It's really special. You said that your dad didn't want to see, for his children, what he had seen. Did he tell you that in so many words, or did you just kind of get the sense?
Well, he grew up as an Army brat. And during let's see, so this would have been from, like, he was born in 1931. So from 1931 until 1944 or 45, he moved and lived in so many places that when he went for his own security clearance for the Army, he couldn't remember everywhere that he lived. And he had to go to his sister, my aunt, who kept a journal of every place that they had ever lived and ever moved to. And then he was able to supply that information to the Army. But he didn't want to, he wanted to be able, he wanted to be able to have us go to the same school and not have to change schools every year and a half or 2 years. And so that's one of the reasons why he got out of the Army.
I also had that experience.
So you had that experience as well.
Well, I had, for a different reason though. My dad did not get out voluntarily from the Navy. It was his first overseas tour, and he had a life-changing accident and became wheelchair bound.
Oh, wow.
And so he was not able to, he wasn't able to fly anymore. And people always say, I'm so sorry to hear it. And yes, my dad would have loved to fly jets for the rest of his life, but I didn't have to go do those tours everywhere and make friends everywhere I went. And there is no one who is more motivational to me than my dad, because when he lost the ability to walk, that man still lifts weights every other day. He still rolls around the block in his racing chair. So it's
awesome.
I have no excuse. There is no excuse for me. Oh, he is a badass beyond description. He cannot be stopped. And so I've never felt like when people say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," I'm like, well, I understand what you're saying, but nothing stopped him. He continued to. He actually ran the trainer down at Oceana for a while after his accident, and still, because he was slated to go to Top Gun. He was going to be the first guy in his year to go to Top Gun, and then he had the accident, and he just continued doing what he could. That's amazing. Nothing stops my father. It's that kind of thing. And I think that's just it. That's the other part of service that I find so inspiring, is people who can just keep, they can face hardship with a lot of strength and resolve. But it can also become overwhelming and difficult. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of dichotomy in veterans, but, I want to hear more about, so there's an interesting line in your Havok Journal bio talking about how you got into supporting veterans, and it ties into 9/11, and I'd love to hear more about that story from you. About why you're doing what you do now.
Well, I was a high school and college football coach for, as the bio says, for almost 30 years. And I still coach indoor track. But when 9/11 happened, a lot of the young men that I coached joined the military. And over a period of years, they didn't come back the same way they went out. for example, one of the young men that I coached was a Marine, and he lost his right arm in Afghanistan. And one of my other athletes ended up with 3 Purple Hearts. So you see firsthand the effects of war and what it can do to people that you know and love. So over a period of years, I got to be more and more interested in what was happening to the veteran community. And then I discovered that that they were having tremendous problems with their mental health. And I learned the statistic about the 22 veterans a day committing suicide, taking their own lives. And I reached a juncture in my life where I'd gone as far as I could coaching football. It wasn't as much fun anymore. And then I realized I had to do something to help veterans. So at that point, I stopped coaching football, and then all the time that I used to spend coaching football, I now do various activities to help veterans out. I've done a 3-day walk from Manchester, Connecticut to Providence, Rhode Island, called the Comfort Walk, and that is for Comfort Farms, which is down in Georgia, run by John Jackson, who's a combat veteran, and he runs the farm for veterans' mental health. And then the Comfort Walk is named after Comfort Farms, which is after Captain Kyle Comfort, who was John Jackson's platoon captain who was killed in Afghanistan. And then I've done other activities, like I've helped out with the Connecticut Run for the Fallen, which was a big fundraiser and veterans event. So I've done a lot of things, and then a little bit more recently, because I'm a good writer, I've gotten involved with the Havok Journal and the Second Mission Foundation, which is run by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Faint, who he's retired from the Army, but he's still a professor at the Modern War Institute, and his sister, and it's an excellent group. So I do quite a few things. Last summer.
That's really incredible.
Yeah. Last summer, one of the things that we were able to accomplish was there was a guy named Joe Kapaszewski, who was the first Army Ranger to lose a leg in combat, return to active duty in the 3rd Ranger Battalion with a prosthetic leg. He had 5 more deployments with a prosthetic leg with the 3rd Ranger Battalion, and then finally medically retired. And tragically, in January of 2023, he took his own life. Left a wife and 2 sons, and I coached against Joe Kapaszewski because he went to Bristol Eastern High School, and I was coaching at New Britain, which is the next town over. And so I went to the memorial service, and they dedicated a wing in honor of Joe Kapaszewski, but they didn't have a visible symbol of Joe to show that, hey, this is who he was. So I went to the school principal, who was a classmate of Joe Kapaszewski's, and I said, hey, I can help create a memorial to Joe and present it to the school. So it took me several months. I had a lot of great help. I was able to put together a shadow box, and his widow, Joe's widow, Kimberly, donated a flag that he'd taken to Afghanistan, put all of his medals and awards. And then I was able to get Michael Regan, who's the artist that he's a Vietnam combat veteran, and he does portraits of fallen service members at no charge to their families. So he did a portrait of Joe Kapaszewski, and then last summer we presented the portrait and the shadow box to the school. So now they have a permanent memorial of Joe Kapaszewski and who he was, and the kids can see it, and they have copies of Joe's book in the school library. So those are some of the kinds of things that I've done.
That's really powerful. I've written a lot about the veteran suicide epidemic because it hurts your heart. The reason I do it is and I've never talked about this on the podcast. I usually, like, my veteran advocacy happened before I started writing about Afghanistan and the withdrawal. But that was my main beat before that happened. And the reason I think that it mattered so much to me is I had the opportunity when I was writing a novel about Afghanistan. I had a family friend who said, hey, an Afghan vet just moved in across the street from me. You should come interview him. And I did. And I sat with him, and he had been in the National Guard, and he was telling me about this deployment that he and his twin brother did together. And, they were actually able to be deployed together because they were in the National Guard. I think I was surprised that they were deployed to the same place, but to Phoenix. And he was talking to me about some of the details. And at first he was like very adversarial with me. I think he looked at me and was like, oh, you're a female, you don't know anything about this. But we started to get comfortable, and I was speaking his language because I had been in the intel world working on those issues, and then he told me that during some of the rocket attacks, he and his brother they went to this one place together and they would hold hands. And he said he'd never told anybody that before, as if it were like shameful. And to me, I thought it was so human. And he clearly was suffering. Like, he was definitely, and he had tried to go to the VA for help. And the VA had said, well, if you're not suicidal, you can't come in right now. You need to make an appointment. And he had driven over an hour to get there. And, he's like, no. I need to see somebody now, but I'm not suicidal. And so he had given up on the VA. And I had this feeling when I left. It was a very weird moment for me because he was married with a child. I was married. I didn't want to start like a "are you okay" kind of situation because I felt like that could be misconstrued. Yes. And so I kind of stepped back, but I thought he probably needed to go see somebody at the VA was my thought. And the next thing it wasn't the next thing I knew. It was probably about a year later. I got the call from the neighbor who had introduced us, who said, hey, Brandon's brother committed suicide. And I guess he had told my friend that looking at his brother in the casket was like looking at himself. And that was when I started. I hadn't intended to use our interview as anything other than like he wanted to be able to tell me what Afghanistan was like because I had never been there. And then I started writing about our interview. And I had just finished writing about it. And I got a call from the family friend that said that Brandon had committed suicide. And I was pregnant with my daughter. And it just, I was bereft. This is somebody I met once, but it just hit me so hard that, that struggle, all of and it made me such a strong advocate for, we need to care for people when they need it. We need to make sure that, and Brandon had this awesome idea that he mentioned during our talk where he was like, there needs to be a place where people can go when they get back from battle, right? Where they can meet with their family outside of the home. There can be like mental health professionals there. And the closest I ever saw to that is like Patrol Base Abate.
Yes,
which isn't quite that, but it's like a place you go, you decompress, you rest and refit.
Yeah.
There need to be more places like that. And anyway, that's when that touches you, what can you do but try to honor them? It's hard though. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, well, I'm angry that you made that choice. And that's an understandable feeling too. But I think you have to, that's the pain. There's so much going on there. I think it's so important that you are doing these things to remember the fallen, to remind people that we've got to talk about this. We have to be there for our veterans, right? This is not an easy thing that we've asked them to do for the last 20 years. So I think that's an incredible thing to be able to do. Do you tell me about the second mission?
Oh, the Second Mission Foundation?
There was another word. I didn't write it down. I couldn't write it down fast enough.
Okay, the Second Mission
Tell
Foundation.
me more about that. I've never heard about them.
Well, it's a publishing house that publishes books that are written by veterans, and they do a great job. They've got a bunch of titles out, and it's they've helped me out a lot with my own research. So it's a good group. Yeah.
That's really cool. And I definitely want to talk about your research at the end, but I want to talk about the Afghanistan bit before we get there, because I want to know, you have been involved with some Afghan cases, but before that, I want to know, how were you feeling at the time of the withdrawal?
It was like watching, the movie The Fugitive, where you see the train and it's going to crash and there's nothing that you can do about it. I mean, it was just so obvious that something bad was going to happen at that airport, and it just, every day I was like sick to my stomach. So when it finally did happen, it just, it made me just sick and angry, and it really did a number on me. I was pretty down for a couple of weeks after August 26th, 2021. So, yeah.
And that's the start of the school year too, which
had
to
is.
be tough.
Yeah. And the other thing was that there wasn't a lot of people that was following what was happening. Some people were, but so it's one of those things where you have to kind of carry it with you, because there isn't anybody else you can talk to about it, and it just, like I said, the whole thing was just made me sick. And in the time after it, I've gotten to know a couple of the Gold Star families who lost their loved ones at the airport, and that's been a moving experience for me as well. So I don't know. Like I said, it hit hard. Yeah, but yeah. So I like I said, I've gotten to know a couple of the families of the 13 service members that were lost at Hamid Karzai Airport, and they'll never get over it. They never will. So, and then the other thing is when you meet veterans who did a lot of time in Afghanistan, or Gold Star families that lost loved ones in Afghanistan, it's like that was a really bitter pill for them to swallow. And when you have conversations with them, it's just it's not a good thing. So
no, I had the incredible opportunity to go be at a really large gala for the families of the fallen, and I actually wrote about it for Havok Journal. I was supposed to write about it for another entity, but they went under right as that was coming out, and Havok Journal was gracious enough to publish the whole thing. Yeah. It's probably in the top 20 of my most moving things I've ever written, and it's I had met Christy Shamblin, Nicole G's mother-in-law, and just watching her, like, the emotion on her face, like I didn't even know what to say. I couldn't think of what to say, because there's just sorry and condolences, like they don't feel deep enough for what has been lost. And the reason they were there was actually to have a roundtable with congressional leaders who were trying to find the real answers to what happened.
Yep.
That how that tragic event came to be, because, why did they have to lose their family members? And it was so emotional and beautiful, but hard. And now, the state of things now, I just wonder, how are they doing? Because many of them came to care about, advocating for our allies, and now our allies are kind of left out in the wind. But we did find the person who, orchestrated that attack. It's just, my heart hurts for all of the people who cared about Afghanistan right now. And I want to hear, because you have had involvement in cases. And so I want to know, how did those people come to you? When did they come to you? Why did they come to you? Let's get some shaping here of like your involvement with Afghans.
It literally landed in my lap. I don't know why, but maybe I just look like somebody that can help, but all of a sudden, late fall 2021, early winter 2022, I had these Afghans reach out to me and say, excuse me, hey, I'm stuck here. Can you help me get out? And then one Afghan said, I made it out, but my family is still there. And it's shocking because it just comes out of nowhere. But these are people that are really desperate, and justifiably so. And so I, tried to do everything I could to help them out, but you keep reaching dead ends. It's not an easy thing to navigate. The various bureaucracies of our government, and so we're still working on it, and going to try some other avenues. But and as we were discussing before, these are people that work for the United States and the United States interests in Afghanistan, and so their lives and their families' lives are under imminent threat from the Taliban government. So, we have to do everything we can to help them. We owe it to them.
What kinds of things were you doing? Were you doing congressional inquiries? Were you trying to, correspond with the care team? Because for me, any time that I've tried to help someone with a case, I've been very not close up with it, because there were so many people coming to me that all I could do was triage and say, okay, you guys all have the same problem, so I can write about your problem. And then I would go to state and say, how many people have this problem, and figure out. So I was very much on the outside. What were you trying to do to help? What was your role there?
Well, trying to pass on information to the State Department. There's a couple of different programs that we're dealing with Afghan refugees, and trying to contact them. And then one just ended, so now we got to figure out something else we can try. So it's been a bunch of different dead ends, and then the other thing was that some of these people work for Americans, but at the time there wasn't 100% verification of who they are. So that kind of also makes it more difficult to help find them a way out, because there's danger in who are these people, so you have to make sure that their identities are 100% established before you can go ahead with some things.
That's really tough.
Yeah. I mean, like I was saying, it's something that I didn't ask for. It just literally fell out of the sky. I start getting, messages on Signal and other platforms, and it's whoa. So. Yeah, I'm sure
I didn't
for
have
you,
Signal
it's just
or
it's been a
WhatsApp
flood
until after the withdrawal.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't give those out either. It's mostly been on other social media platforms where I've had a lot of outreach, and just although now I'm getting signal contacts from people where I'm like, oh my God, I can't even recall. I know I wrote about your case, but like it's so far now, but there's just a lot more desperation right now. And
Yeah.
so people who thought that they were going to just kind of make it and sit and wait, now they're like, oh no, if I don't have a visa now, I'm never coming. You know, it's
Yeah.
very sad to
Yeah.
see. But I wonder, because I have strong feelings about this, and you might too, given our sameness in so many different ways. But did it feel better to be helping those Afghans than to just have that like anger that you had to carry with you? Like, oh my God, when you said, you know,
Oh,
you had
yeah.
to carry that anger with you because there was no one to talk about it with. I felt that too. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm crazy for feeling this strongly about something, you know, and like nobody else around me wants to hear about it because, I mean, my loved ones would listen to me, but you know, I couldn't just go to the store and be like, oh my gosh, you know, no. So, did it feel better to be
Oh, it does.
involved
Yeah.
and like to have, you know, some kind of participation? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, you just, you know, I think this is a pattern kind of in my life where you get hit by something, you know, whatever situation it is, and then you go through this little like, you know, why did this have to happen? You know, woe is me. And then you start thinking about it, and it's like, no, damn it, I better do something about this. And then you respond by taking positive actions, and it really improves the situation a lot. You know, I mean, the big thing for me is right now, I feel like I'm living for a cause that's larger than myself. And I think that's the most in my life. I think that's the most rewarding thing that you can ever do is live for a cause that's bigger than yourself. And so helping out, you know,
Yep.
refugees, helping out veterans, you know, helping out Gold Star families. You just feel like you're contributing to a legacy that's, you know, that's beneficial. That's going to leave the world a better place than when you got here. So that's how I see it.
I'm all about that. I told you before we started recording. Yeah, before we started recording, I told you that my dad always told me, because I think he had that idea that probably I might cry too much to be in the service. Although he always told me he could get me a spot at the Naval Academy if I
Yeah.
wanted one, but I would have never made it through plebe summer. I would have just been like, no, I couldn't, I could not do it. But he told me everybody can serve their country. You know,
Hmm?
there's many ways to do that, but everybody has to. And
Yep.
I feel that, you know, I used to think that it was my NGIC time that was my service,
Yeah.
but I really think it's now. It's been the
Yeah.
last 3.5 years of just everything has gone on the back burner that isn't, you know, my children or what I have to do to make an income, and then like Afghanistan, right?
That's
Like
right.
but it's, I would never have it any other way. It gave me
Yeah.
purpose. It gave
Yep.
me power to make a difference for someone else. And I will tell people until the day I die that if you are feeling down in your life, find something to do for other people, because it will
Yeah.
bring you out of that place.
Yep.
You know, it is truly, it sounds, it's a strange thing how doing something that's entirely selfless can give you, you know, power inside of yourself, but it really can. And I, so many days in the last couple weeks, I felt really, really disheartened.
Hmm.
But then there are those moments of, you know, oh my gosh, somebody came through, somebody got to the US, somebody, you know, was able to go change. And then my whole day brightens because, okay, there's like a moment of light in the darkness, or, you know, I get an answer for someone, and it just, yeah, it's everything. But I want to know how you feel about the current scenario. And, you know, you can be as political or apolitical as you like, but, you know, what do you think we need to be doing in terms of our allies and what we're doing going
Yeah.
forward, and why do you feel that way?
Well, I think, well, as we were talking about before we started recording, there are so many Afghans who put themselves at serious risk in order to provide us aid and help us to achieve our goals in that country. And we owe it to them to make sure that they're safe, which means that they've got to get out of Afghanistan because they're at extreme risk for the fact that they helped us. So I would like to see that the SID program continue and for us to get these people out of Afghanistan, themselves and their families, because their families are also at risk. So I don't know, what the government's going to decide to do in the next few weeks, but hopefully they do the right thing by them, And then, as we were also discussing, if we violate that trust with the Afghans, who's going to trust us in the future? So it behooves us to do it, from an international relations standpoint too. If we want to develop allies in other countries, they're going to look at what's happened in Afghanistan and say, why are we going to help you? So it's important to stand by the people that stood by us.
I agree. Absolutely. Well, before we close out tonight, I really want to hear about your book project you have going on, which has nothing to do with Afghanistan, but everything to do with still the global war on terror. First of all, how did you settle on this?
Well, it's in my case, in my life, it's kind of one thing leads to another. I decided to do this fundraising walk, for Comfort Farms, and I had been following Michael Yon's blog, and he was attached to the 124th Infantry Regiment, and he put out that a few of the guys from the Deuce 4 were going to walk from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. in 6 months, and they were going to do it for veterans' mental health. They called it the Walk of Life. And because I had experience walking long distances, I connected with the guys, and I was able to offer them some advice. And then one of the guys had a bad foot, and I got him some medical aid from a distance from a professional athletic trainer that I knew, and I got to be friends with these guys online. And then when they were finishing, I walked the last 3 days of their walk from Virginia into Washington, D.C., and I got to know all the veterans of this unit. So then from there, I got to be friends with them, and we were all on Facebook. And a couple of years ago, somebody said, "Hey, somebody should write a book about our experiences in Iraq." And so I kind of tentatively stuck my hand up, like, well, I might be able to help with that. And so then I was off to the races, and it's been an incredible journey. I've interviewed dozens of veterans of the unit, gotten their experiences in writing and recorded. The public relations officer by trade was a librarian, and she had all kinds of newspaper articles and videos and all kinds of things that I've been able to take advantage of. I've collected journals of some of the soldiers who kept journals while they were deployed, and then because the unit was a striker brigade, it went down to Anniston, Alabama, I watched the Stryker vehicles being assembled at the Anderson National Army Depot. So I did that. And let's see. Then last fall, the guys had a 20-year reunion of their deployment in Kansas City, in part because a number of the veterans live in the Kansas City area, and then also because it's centrally located in the country. So I went out and met them there, and got to talk to them and make contact with people that I had known online but had never met in person. And so now I have about one more round of interviews to do. I'm going to try. The unit commander was Eric Carilla, who's now the CENTCOM commander, and I'm going to try to get an interview with him to record his experiences. We'll see if I can make that happen. And then a few other people like that, and then I'll be ready to put the whole thing down on paper. So that's been the bulk of my research over the last couple of years. Yeah, it's really something. So
That's amazing. What was the reunion like?
it was really incredible. The guys got to hang out in there's a it's kind of hard to describe. It's like a bar and a restaurant, but they have like an outdoor patio with a fireplace. So we hung out in this outdoor patio and got to talk, and then the next morning, there's a veteran who runs a program that they have a little village with tiny houses for homeless veterans, and they gave us a tour of this village, and it was just incredible. They have these small houses. They're probably like 10 feet, like 8 or 10 feet wide by 14 feet long. Bedroom, refrigerator, little stove, shower. All the things you need in a home, but it's small, so you can manage it. And they take these veterans in. They get them drug and alcohol treatment. They give them a place to live. They give them vocational training, everything they need to be self-sufficient. And when they're ready, they can go out on their own. So it's a great concept. So we did that on Saturday morning, and then Saturday afternoon we had a big reunion at one of the establishments in Kansas City, and it was really neat. It was really neat. So, and then one of the things that I didn't realize, the majority of the deployment for the Deuce 4 in 2004-2005 was in Mosul, but I didn't realize that there were elements of the unit that spent a lot of time in Talifar. So I connected with the guys who were in Talifar, and the pictures. I never realized that there were some real ancient buildings, like this big, huge fort that goes back like who knows how long. So it was pretty interesting to learn about all the things that were happening in Talifar. So.
Tell me about like the most surprising thing you've heard so far, or the thing that like hit you the most hard in this whole process.
A bunch of things. I can tell you one thing. One of the guys that I'm talking to actually lives in this area, and he and I met a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that he talked about was shooting an enemy fighter, dropping him in the middle of the street, and then the enemy fighter's father ran out into the street and was mourning over the body of his son. And so you think about the moral injury of, like, yeah, he was a bad guy, but he was somebody's son, and this guy's got to live with it, So I mean, like I said, or here's another example. One of the big incidents that occurred was that the unit was operating out of Fob Marez, which is right outside of the old section of Mosul. And on December 21st, 2004, right before Christmas, a suicide bomber was able to get into the dining facility and blow it up, and 21 soldiers were killed and there were 74 wounded. And I talked to one of the guys that was literally 15 feet away from the bomber. He was facing away from the kitchen where the bomber was. The guy that he was eating with, his buddy, saw the bomber, said, "Oh shit," and then the suicide bomb went off, and his buddy who was facing the suicide bomber was killed, but he only took like some ball bearings into his foot. He had a TBI, but physically at the time, he only, even though he was only 15 feet away from the bomb, he only took a few ball bearings into his body, and that was it. But the guy facing him at the other side of the table lost his life. So those are the kinds of things that I've been, getting in my interviews.
That's an awful lot. I mean,
Yeah.
still, that's trauma that you're taking on from, yes, not directly, but how do you handle that? What's your mechanism for like offloading it? Like when I was writing my novel about Sengen, or partially about Sengen, I would literally do like art projects at the end of those chapters because I was like, I needed something that was not blood and guts and gore and horror stories and real people who lost their lives. So what do you do to kind of step back from that and get
a lot of exercise? Work out every day, and that helps a lot. And then, although I wish I could do more, but I'm an avid fisherman. Love to fly fish, so I'll do that, and that also helps too. Brings me a lot of peace. So I'm fortunate. I live a couple of blocks away from a real nice trout fishing river. So, it's always there for me.
That's perfect. I love it.
Yep.
Yeah. For me, fitness is always, man, when I'm running, it's like, that's the best. Just mental clearing exercise. It works a lot better than art actually, but I didn't know that at the time because I was not running at the time. Now I'm like, oh no, I need to go run.
Yep.
Or punch things. That works too.
That also helps.
But yeah, those are all good things. Well, I would love to let you, whatever you want to say, if there's something I didn't ask about, if there's something you want to bring up before the end, I'll give you the closing words tonight, Steve. And then I will be reading a letter from an Afghan actually after that. But
yeah.
What is there anything I didn't ask that you want to share?
Well, there's a couple of different things. If you bear with me, the first is that I've gotten to meet Afghans who were able to make it out, and who were interpreters for service members, and that was quite an honor. I was really glad to be able to do that. And then the other thing that I like to do is that every day I take a 6-mile walk out and back from my house to get ready for this walk that I do on Memorial Day. And every day what I do is I try to have a poster of a service member who was lost on that day. And so then my walk isn't just for myself, it's for that lost service member. And it's great motivation. You're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for, you're doing it for the service member, and you're doing it for their family. And I've met, and because of that, I've met a lot of the Gold Star families, and and develop good relationships with them, which is just, it's been an incredible experience because of that. Just to be able to talk to brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, and it helps them to know that their loved one's not forgotten.
Absolutely. They say, I don't know if you've ever done Wreaths Across America, but I have had that experience one year, and before everyone started laying the wreaths on the veterans, headstones, the person leading the event said, there are 2 times that you die. And the first time is when you depart the earth, but the second time is the last time anyone says your name.
That's right.
And I think if you're remembering someone, if you're wearing their name, if you're doing that, other people then, and when you share the story too, it then goes to somebody else, and
That's
then
right.
they remember it, and maybe they tell it to somebody else, and you
That's
just
right.
keep that legacy going that way. Because one thing that drives me crazy about our culture, it's like we're afraid to ask veterans about their service, right? And so we miss those rich moments to hear about the stories that veterans have. We miss those moments to hear about the people they care about, that they lost, that they want us to know about. And we need to do that more, to hear those stories, to remember those sacrifices, because they were made for us.
Yep.
It's our duty, I think, to remember them. I think it's so beautiful that you do that. Really.
Well, somebody taught me this expression. It's Latin. It's Debeo Semper Memoriam. We're morally bound to always remember, and so I try to keep that in mind.
I think it's incredible. I'm so glad to have had you on, and I think it's nice to, yes, we talked about Afghanistan, but I think there's a lot more to this conversation, and I was glad to get into it with you. It was really special. And before we close, like I said, I have a letter from an Afghan who was hoping to share some anonymous information per usual, because most people who are sending in their stories can't share their names because they're sending them from Afghanistan. And as we said today, that means that you are in incredible danger, or they might not be in Afghanistan, but if they have to return there, they're in incredible danger. And right now, we don't know if the people who are in third countries are going to be forced to return to Afghanistan. So I'm going to read this one. There is no name in it whatsoever, so we're good. I don't have to fear doing that. Here we go. Dear Beth, thank you for giving Afghan allies like me a voice in these dark times. I want to share my story, but I ask that you please keep my name and organizations confidential. The risks are too high, and even speaking out feels dangerous. For over a decade, I worked in humanitarian protection programs, helping the most vulnerable, survivors of torture, women facing gender-based violence, and individuals targeted for their past work with the previous Afghan government. I dedicated my life to helping others, ensuring they had safety and dignity. But now I am the one who needs help. Since the fall of Afghanistan, I have been living in constant fear. Some of my former colleagues have been arrested. I had to flee my home province to avoid being recognized and targeted. I don't go outside unless absolutely necessary. I don't trust anyone. I have seen people disappear, and I know that if I am caught, the same fate awaits me. The past 3.5 years have been unbearable, but the last month and a half have been even worse. With the rumors of a travel ban, it feels like the last hope we were holding on to is slipping away. I am trapped, emotionally exhausted, and mentally drained. I can't even send my son to school because the curriculum is so radicalized that it will destroy his future. Every day I ask myself, how long can we survive like this? I am not asking for pity. I am asking for action. If the U.S. truly values its Afghan allies, it cannot abandon us now. We P2 holders are not a burden. We are an asset. I have an MBA, which I paid for myself. I have skills, experience, and the ability to contribute to the U.S. economy and society. But none of that will matter if we are left here to be hunted down. Beth, if there is anything you can do to help my case or connect me with someone who can, I would forever be grateful. I'm also hoping to bring awareness by sharing the story on your podcast, which is what we're doing right now, friend. Please just don't let us be forgotten. Thank you for your time and for standing with us. So this individual obviously is looking for help. If anyone out there knows of anything that can be done, obviously US RAP is suspended, so P2 is really in a vulnerable place right now, but if you have thoughts, anything, and who knows, by the time that this comes out, maybe there will be an answer. But if not, and you see this, please send a message to the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Also, if you are an Afghan who wants to share a story, I would be delighted to share it here, and you can send that to the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Steve, I want to thank you again for being here. It's been a really, really great time. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I can't wait to have you on to talk about the book when you get it written too. So, even though it's the Afghanistan Project Podcast, I get to choose who I have. So I'll have you back to talk about the book.
Well, anytime you want me to.
It'll be an adventure.
Yeah. Anytime you want me to talk, I can talk.
I think that's also part of the being raised by veterans thing. Well, thank you to everyone who is out there still watching, and hope to see you again soon. Make sure you're notified, got all the notifications on the YouTube page set up so you get, notices when new episodes come out. And again, Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you all again soon.